Hey, Sens fans,
Yeah.
we're keeping that in. Welcome to season 4, episode 21 of the Senstennial podcast, a member of the Hockey Podcast Network. This week, we're going to talk about what went wrong. The last 15 games have not been kind to the Ottawa Senators, and we're just wondering, what happened to that playoff race we were so excited about 15 games ago? We'll talk about the injuries and how maybe that's played a factor. Goaltending problems, again, in case you missed our last video, we talked all about those. And is it time for the coach to go? I feel like we've asked this one a few times. We'll revisit it briefly again tonight. So thanks for tuning in, and let's get this show on the road. Bennett, the last 15 games, the Sens are 5-8-2, and it is just not looking good for the Ottawa Senators. Their playoff hopes are, I think, at a 0.1% as of today from Money Puck, and that's really not great. That's not what you want to see. So, what have you thought about the Sens and where it all went wrong for them?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, there are no playoff hopes. I mean, there were no playoff hopes after like the first week of the after the trade deadline when, we fell flat in our face against Chicago and Vancouver. Those were winnable games that we absolutely needed to rack up, and we didn't. And ever since then, I mean, the gap has just become a chasm. So I mean, again, we've said this before. I'm a little disappointed, but I'm not too frustrated by it because I think playoffs was always going to be a stretch this season. And the fact that, post deadline, we were still playing meaningful games is an improvement over the last couple of seasons. But there are things to point out, things that have gone wrong. And we're going to talk about injury woes in a moment. We're going to talk about goaltending issues. And we're going to talk about coaching issues. I think all of those are at play here. Goaltending has let us down going into the stretch. Injuries have been a problem going into the stretch, and coaching has been a problem probably all season long. And we've seen a lot of decisions that are baffling at times. We've seen, systems that are weak and which don't provide structure and support to players that are on the ice. And we've also seen individually poor performances at times from Sens players. We've seen guys like DeBrincat go cold at inopportune moments in the season. I mean, at times he's looked very good this season. I'm still a big believer in the guy. But he went ice cold at the most critical point of our season and couldn't hit a barn door. I mean, like, you can't legislate for that kind of thing. Goal scorers are gonna have cold patches. That's the way of the game. You can't score every game, because if you did, you'd be scoring 80 goals a season, and nobody does that. So it's gonna happen, but it sucks that it happened when it did. If it had happened, when the team was already bad, that it just would have been another thing on the list. But the fact that it happened when the team was moving in the right direction sucks. And I know that other players are to blame as well. Batherson, Shabbat, who is a guy who I really love and admire. He's had like a so-so season at times. And I do want to touch on that later as well. But just to put a bow on it, I think a lot of different things have gone wrong, and you can't exactly pinpoint one thing. And I think what a lot of it comes down to the fact is that it was always going to be a stretch this season. I know coming into the season, we were all super hyped up about the summer of Pierre, and the team got a lot better on paper, and it did get on paper. And you know what? The team is better. Like, the team did not take a step back this year. It took a step forward. But the problem is that you needed to take like 5 steps forward to go from where we were to a playoff team. And I think that we got a little bit lost in the hype of how many steps needed to take place for that to happen. And we've taken a step or two this season, and we're still not there yet. And that's okay, because it's going to have to be in a year or two that we really go for it. And this year, we've still seen some significant progress. And I know, Matt, I'm going to toss it to you in just 1 second, but just to highlight one thing that's gone very right in the stretch. I mean, Tim Stützle's sitting at 84 points right now. Do you remember the last time that the Sens had a player that put up over 80 points? I do, because I looked it up before this episode.
Spezza?
Yeah, it was Eric Carlson.
It
And then
was Eric
before that,
Carlson
it
in
was Jason Spezza.
2015-16.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
in the 2015-16 season, Carlson had 82 points. Timmy has 84 today and could easily hit, like 86, 87 by the time of the season is over. That's crazy for a guy in the last year of his ELC. And we've got a player there. And he's taken a step this year. A lot of guys have taken steps. And I think that this season will not be a failure by our missing the playoffs, which we're going to, because obviously.
All right. Well, thanks, Bennett. Yeah, Matt, did you have anything to add before we move on to the next topic?
Obviously, Bennett, is so succinct and beautifully spoken in what he just laid out, but it was always going to be a stretch. I went into the season saying we're going to make the playoffs. We're going to be a wild card team. And you know what? If we had Josh Norris the entire season, I think that's very well possibility. But, how many sayings are there? If this happened, then this would have happened. But we were a victim of our own circumstances, and we were also a victim of DJ Smith. Coaching was the nail in the coffin right from the get-go. I was very on board with giving him 15 games this season. If he did not have a 500 record, he's gone. And unfortunately, we kept him. Obviously ownership situation, very weird. But the fact of the matter is this team is way better than it was last year. And the last year's Sens were finishing the season on a high note. But, you put them against this team and it's night and day. Our defense last night had Jake Sanderson, Artem Zub, the Branchise, Nick Holden, Tyler Clevin, and JVD. And that is a better decor than we have had on most of the seasons previously.
And with our two best defenders sitting out injured.
Exactly. The beauty of it is that our season came down to crappy injuries and losing in November. That was it. You win one game and one extra game a month, and the Sens are in a playoff spot right now. Like that's the craziness of how the NHL is. And we're sitting here looking outside of the playoffs, and we're not going to make it. The game against Columbus was as solidified as it can get for losing every opportunity. And, we're going to talk about coaching. We already know my answer. We're going to talk about goaltending, and we're going to talk about injuries. But
yeah,
this season is an absolute positive compared to last. And it's a great stepping stone because next year it's playoffs or bust.
Now, getting into the injuries, I know we basically touched on at least half of them there, but yeah, Ottawa went without Josh Norris for most of the season. He only played 8 games. Shabbat and Chikrin have been out for at least the last couple weeks, if not a bit longer. Forsberg has been out for the entirety of going on 3 months now. He's been out for what seems like an eternity.
I think he went down in February, right?
Yeah. February. So it's been quite some time. Obviously Cam Talbot went down a couple times, and I know he's been inconsistent, but we'll get to that as well. And then recently against the Flyers, Ottawa loses Hamnick and Brassard to season-ending injuries at minimum. We'll see what their recovery times are, but who knows if they'll be ready to go next season, if either of them are brought back next season. But there were a lot of injuries. And yeah, I'll flip it over to Bennett. I mean, how big of a factor did injuries really play in this season?
That's been a huge factor. And I know that every team is going to tell you that. Every team is going to say that has a lackluster season will tell you that, injuries. And I think this is the Sens have a legitimate claim of objectivity here. I'd put Montreal up there as well. They've had ridiculous injury problems this season. I mean, there are times where you can really pinpoint it and say, yeah, injuries were a huge thing holding us back. I mean, Shabbat, Chikrin, Hamonic, Greg, Brassard, Kelly, Forsberg, Norris. Some of those guys have only gone down in the last few weeks, which is, at the time in which we're desperately trying to cling to our playoff hopes. And so that sucks. But the biggest and most significant injury was to Josh Norris. Coming into this season, the Sens center depth looked really good on paper. We had, Tim Stutzler in the number one spot, maybe coming into the season. We might have said Norris was number one, Stutzler was number two, but we all know what the score is now. Stutzler's a superstar. So let's say our Sens depth was, Stutzler line one, Norris line two, and Pinto line three. That's really, really good. And what was happening at the start of the season was, even though Norris got off to a slightly sluggish start in like the 5 games or something he played off the top, Pinto was really thriving in the third line role. And any goals that Norris might not have been scoring at that point were getting gobbled up by Pinto and that line. I think he was playing with like Matthew Joseph and Tyler Mott at one point, and they were having a lot of success. And, having a rookie who has a goal scorer's touch playing on your third line is such an asset to a team, because it really helps your 5-on-5 scoring. Pinto is a guy who, under normal healthy circumstances where the whole team is available, probably wouldn't be getting a ton of power play time. But if he can score at even strength, it really eases a bit of the pressure on the team and the guys ahead of him in the lineup. And what's happened is that with Norris out, Pinto has been playing up the lineup, and he's looked okay there, but he would be more effective on a third line role. And, DeBrincat and Batherson, who have been Pinto's usual line mates, are, he's a rookie, and you can't put too much onus on him to be a top 6 center who's dishing pucks and scoring goals and doing it all. I mean, he wasn't supposed to be that at his point in his career. He's been good, but he hasn't been Josh Norris. And, we've seen the play of DeBrincat and Batherson, both of them arguably take steps back. I think that Batherson, it's a little bit tougher to say because he missed all the time with injury last season. But I think DeBrincat, you'd say, it's been a bit of an off year for him. But we know that he has, all the tools in his locker to put it together. And if he had a guy like Norris that was able to find him a little bit more consistently, perhaps, then maybe he'd have that 30 goal mark already, And it's just it's tough. And it puts Pinto in a worse position, and it brings our other depth forwards into positions where they wouldn't normally be. And center injuries can really hit you. I mean, centers and goalies are the most important positions in a team. And to lose your number 1 or number 2 guy, depending on how you slice it at the start of the year, for the whole year, it's always going to have an impact.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll really add on to that is, because I was going to say the same about Pinto playing up the lineup, but DeBrincat is nearing a career high in assists. And if you have a guy like Josh Norris playing center who has a hell of a one-timer, I feel like you get even more assists and more goals from Norris. It's a domino effect. That whole line starts producing more, and you see the results of that, and it would positively reflect in Ottawa's record. But I digress. The only other thing I'll add about the injuries is, Zub had a lot of injuries earlier in the season. I don't think he's been quite himself. He still defends fine, but he was known for kind of being able to also be a part of the cycle in the offensive zone and chipping in. And he's been kind of quiet and cold in that category the last couple of months. And I think maybe his December injury had something to do with that. And having Chychrun and Shabbat at full health back next season, it'll give whichever coaching staff's in place a lot of options on the back end to put those pairings together. But Matt, I'll let you chime in on the injury situation and how bad that's been.
Yeah, it's obviously been extremely challenging because the lines instantly go into a jumble. Alex DeBrincat probably would have benefited a lot from Josh Norris being in the lineup, as you guys really laid it out. But the guy, in 77 games still has 62 points. It's like he is having this down year that everybody's like, oh my God, it's so bad. And he's having the 3rd best statistical season of his career. So that's a good problem to have, I guess, because I think this guy is just entering his prime. And when you add Josh Norris, who is a dependable 2-way center, who has 40 goal seasons written all over him. And I think he's going to be a large benefactor on either the first or second power play. He was the guy that was supposed to be sort of penciled in on that second power play, where if the first one didn't score, oh my gosh, we have Claude Giroux, Josh Norris, Eric Brandstrom or Jake Sanderson, all these guys on that second power play unit, just like hammering goalies, and our power play was extremely successful this year. And I think that's in a large part to do with the core of players that we have, but losing a guy like Josh Norris is obviously detrimental. And I think adding him gets you a couple more wins this season, like no question. Losing guys like Matthew Joseph for longer periods of time, Tyler Mott before he was traded, like these depth guys that then they inserted like, bums, to be honest with you. I think Patrick Brown being in the lineup as much as he is over a guy who drives offense like Julien Gauthier is another coaching thing that drives me up the wall. But probably the second biggest detriment to this season when it came to injuries was the Anton Forsberg injury. I only really had faith in him this season in net. Cam Talbot started the season hurt, had, 3 or 4 excellent games, but I never felt super comfortable with him in net. Whereas Forsberg was on pace to give us the consistency we had the season prior, when he took the starting job from Matt Murray. And then he goes down in the Edmonton game because, listen, I always hate modern style defensemen shove players into goalies. If you are a young defenseman listening to this podcast, do not do that. It's the dumbest thing you could possibly do, because then you have guys who now have 2 knees that need to be fixed. But Forsberg was playing well enough. And I think adding Jacob Chikrin, it would have been, just another cog in the defensive wheel that to lead to success. But him going down, and no fault of his own. I mean, it was going to happen at that point, but it just led to the fact that, we could not rely on anybody in the goalie position. What's up, NBA fans? It's time to bring the hoops action to the palm of your hand with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. This week, new customers can bet $5 and win $200 in free bets instantly. Plus, for a limited time, all new and existing customers can get a no-sweat same-game parlay every day. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app today, opt in, and place a same-game parlay on any NBA game. And if it doesn't hit, you'll get a free bet back. I love the Raptors. Ride or die for them. Would not bet on them this year. So bet against them, make some money, makes your life a little easier. Download the app now and sign up with the code THPN. New customers can bet $5 on the NBA and get $200 in free bets instantly. Only at the DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, with code THPN. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void in Ohio. See show notes for details.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for listening to this week's episode or watching it on YouTube, whichever format you're getting it on. Appreciate you tuning in. You can find us on Twitter at Senstennial or Instagram, Facebook, Reddit at the Senstennial. Give us a follow there or subscribe to us here. We'd really appreciate it. And on that note, we'll kind of kick things off where Matt left us at goaltending. It feels like we talk about this every season. Last year it was like, okay, who's going to be ready to take over the backup role? Is Gustafsson ready? He had a good stint the prior season. And then last year he didn't play as well. Joey Decord, ended up getting taken by the Kraken. There's just all these question marks around goaltending. And this year they come into the season, they have a tandem of a 1A, 1B of Talbot and Forsberg, and you're like, okay, they went for the veteran, they traded Gus, and it hasn't panned out. And so we'll kind of touch on that. Matt, I know you're our goalie guy, but I'm going to give Bennett the floor here to kick things off on the goalie conversation.
Yeah, earlier in this season when Forsberg was healthy and when Talbot had come back from his first injury, we had been saying that goaltending wasn't an issue this season, and that was true for a lot of the season. But since Forsberg has went down with his injury against the Oilers back in February, it's become a problem. And that's because at times we've been without Talbot as well. When he has been in, he hasn't always or often been good. And we've been relying on, a carousel of rookies like Sogard and Mandolisi to jump into positions that I think they're not really ready for yet. And it's created a goaltending problem for us at this, critical point in the season. In recent games, you've seen this play out. Sogard put in strong performances against Tampa and Florida, but he got pulled in the game against the Leafs this past Saturday for giving up 3 goals, and then Talbot replaced him. Talbot has also been weak, in that game against Philadelphia last week. In otherwise, should have just been like an easy layup of a game. Philadelphia had like 5 shots partway through the second period or something stupid like that. And Talbot, like, basically by himself let them back into the game to the point where we had to win it in OT. He had a .636 save percentage that night. That should basically never happen at the NHL level. It's bush league stuff, and I say that having not an ounce of hockey talent in my body, but that's just like statistically that's not acceptable for any professional goalie playing in this league. And it sucks because Forsberg is like the only goalie currently in our system that we'd really be comfortable with handing like 40 or 50 games to. And even that, I think, would probably be like a little bit of a stretch for him, but it's kind of our only option. And, we have like Levi Merilainen. He's joined the organization here in North America. He had a fantastic, showing in the AHL last week where he put up a 40+ save shutout or something. He's since been called up to the team and might get some game time here in the run-in, and that's really cool. But I think that as much as I was gassing him up in previous episodes, and I am really high on him, I think that trying to thrust him into a role that he's not necessarily quite ready for isn't going to help either. And all of this to say, I mean, like, I don't even really care about this season anymore. Like, yeah, like goaltending has become a problem for this team in the final third of the season, but it's going to be a problem next year too. And it's going to be a problem from the start next year. And that is spooky, because if you can't get out from under goaltending, you can't get anywhere in this league. That's it, right? Teams that don't have goaltending are not playoff teams, period. And they're certainly not cup winning teams.
Unless you're the Colorado Avalanche.
Sure, yeah. But we don't have the players that they have. And yeah, it's a serious question mark, and probably the biggest one. I mean, we're going to talk about coaching in a second. I think that we all see the writing on the wall there. There's a new ownership change. Change is going to come, but new ownership, unless if they come with like I don't know, like serious blackmail by Andrei Vasilevsky that leads to him being forced to accept a trade to Ottawa, then they're not going to be able to solve that question on day one. And I think it's going to be a serious question.
Yeah. I mean, Bennett is very much correct in his sort of roundup of the Sens. I think, we expected Forsberg to be the guy this year, and Talbot was supposed to be just like a supporting goalie that gets 30 games. And I think, another tie into the coaching thing is DJ loves veterans, and to a fault. And when Talbot was playing poorly and Forsberg was playing well, he did not care. And it said, I'm going back to the veteran because he knows how to do it. And that cost us wins. And now we're sitting in a situation where Talbot has cost us wins recently, flat out. The Philadelphia game was some of the worst NHL goaltending I've ever seen. Why? Because even like, listen, I understand when people say, well, he didn't have a lot of shots, so he's cold. He's an NHL goalie that makes millions of dollars. He knows his job. He needs to do the job. Period. The fourth goal, I can excuse it because it was a crappy defending. Otherwise, can't get with it. The Columbus game, holy moly, finally DJ says something in the post-game interviews about how even though Stützle gave it up, that should have been a save. We expect a save there. And quite frankly, the nail in the coffin for Talbot signing here was the Philadelphia game. He will not be back, period. End of story. Dorion probably closed that contract, cap friended Page, and said, sayonara. Sogard has been as expected. He's a rookie, and I was not expecting that much. It's unfortunate that he's been put into this situation. Goaltending this year, aside from Forsberg, has been pretty average to actually below average. Sorry. Kevin Ferguson or Dylan Ferguson put in an excellent game. And then had a all right game the next one, but his style is clunky. He's not an NHL goalie, but he got a win, and that goes a long way in what was the march to the hopes for the playoffs. But this coming off season, they're gonna have to explore a trade or signing somebody like Korpisalo, Aiden Hill, maybe offer sheeting Jeremy Swayman. I know offer sheets don't really happen, but they need to figure something out because like you can't let goaltending be the thing that sinks your hopes.
Yeah.
And I think even if they have a modicum of consideration of going with DJ Smith as a coach next year, he'll be the evident downfall of the team anyways. So we can move to coaching now, and that's the start, baby.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was just gonna say, for anyone who missed it, we did do like a deeper dive into goaltending on our previous episode. So you can check that out on our channel, or if you're listening on audio, you can check out our past episode there. But yeah, coaching. And I mean, I think I was kind of on the same page as you, Matt, when we entered the season. I was like, all right, let's see through 15, 20 games where the Sens at. And if a change needs to be made, a change needs to be made. At this point, it's kind of deflating when your team takes steps towards the playoffs and your team wins, say, 3 games, 4 games in a row. But during that time span, a team like Pittsburgh, may win 3 or 4 games in a row. And then you lose a game following Pittsburgh losing a game. It's like you just wish that there was consistency. And maybe that's not on coaching. It's definitely some of the blame goes to the players and the goaltending and injuries, all the stuff we talked about so far. But it just feels like that inconsistency of which team you're going to get on a nightly basis has been a theme of DJ Smith's tenure. He wants the guys to play hard. I get it. He wants them to hit, block shots, all that stuff. They want to be an Ottawa Senators team that's tough to play against and all that. And I get it. But at the end of the day, like, if that team is the team you want every night, well, then you have to make sure that they're playing that style every night. And he's a player's coach, and that's great. But I think they need a guy who is able to kind of whip them into shape as well. And I'm not saying go all the way and get a Tortorella or Daryl Sutter or something like that. I think those guys are too extreme where you're burning out players pretty quick. But I think you need a guy who can be there for the players, but also can whip them into shape. Be like, listen, guys, this isn't good enough. We need to get going here, and have the players, kind of sit back and be like, crap, like we're in shit, like we got to get going. Yeah, I just think that they need a change in that regard. And I just think DJ Smith, it's too late to kind of change that part of your coaching style. You've been embedded with this team for what, a few years now. I just think you won't be able to get that out of your players at this point in time. It'll be too weird of a change. And so I think the only reasonable change you can make is just outright changing the coach and the coaching staff. But that's where I stand, and I'll flip it to Ben and get his thoughts, and then we can flip back to you, Matt.
Yeah, I've said on this podcast before that I respect a lot of what DJ has done for this team. I think that he's, like you said, he's a player's coach. Guys like Brady, Shabbat, like the leaders of this young team, have bought into DJ and his style in a way that you definitely didn't see for some of the more recent coaches that the Sens have had. You know, your Dave Camerons, oh my, Frick, what's the guy's name? Boucher, thank you. My God. Sorry. I was like, I see his face perfectly in my mind. You know, it's like those guys left a bad taste in their mouths when they left the team. I don't think that'll be the case with DJ. I think that there's some fundamental, we rag on him for his love of veterans, for his love of his big boys, and for, you know, like not being able to coach defense, and all of those are true. We've all complained about that, but I think that he leaves players with a good attitude, and, you know, an understanding of, you know, how to play hard and how to work hard and stuff, and all of that is great. But I don't think he's a coach to take this team forward, and I don't think that he will be, because there's new ownership coming into town, and if there's one thing that you can say about the Sens hockey ops department, it's that it has been underinvested in, and they have not cast a very wide net when it comes to recruiting talent. And what we're hoping is that when a new ownership group comes in, they're going to see this as an easy way to upgrade the team for minimal expense, because players cost a lot of money. You know, backroom staff don't usually. And, you know, with you can have an outsized impact on the results of your team by investing in good people behind the bench. And I think it's an opportunity for a clean slate to come in, thank DJ and our other assistant coaches for their time, and replace them with people who have actual NHL pedigree, or at the very least are promising up-and-comers who have shown serious and consistent results at like the minor league level. That's what we want. And I think that there's two possible ways you could go about it. I think if you're worried about too much change at once when the new ownership group takes over, because, you know, I think that you can keep Dorion and get rid of the coaches and let him, with your advice and support of whatever new people you're bringing in, you know, lead the process to find the replacements. Or perhaps you get rid of Dorion and you replace him with your own guy, and you let him take the lay of the land and make whatever choices he make at the GM level. I think it'd probably be a lot to come in and replace everybody, you know, from the GM down to the coaches. I think you need a little bit of a tether of continuity from one regime to the next. But I mean, you know, what better time for a clean slate than at the very start of a new ownership tenure? And I think that they would be justified in any kind of way that they want to slice it. I think we all hope that it's coaching that they come down on at the beginning, but maybe it's the GM, and you get what you're talking about, Naif, where it's like, you know, DJ coming into the season, he gets a hard 15 games, and like if we're below 500 at game 14, like the new GM says, nope, I'm gonna go get my guy, whoever that guy is.
Yeah, I think
that's it.
Yeah, I think it's tough going into a season that they are going to have expectations of playoffs.
Yeah.
It sounding like that Remington is the front runner in the first round of bids, and Reynolds has built like a culture at Wrexham of improving. You know, he cleaned house there. Obviously he's not going to have as much say power as he does there because it's a much bigger franchise, but at the same time, I think Dorion has bought himself some time and bought himself more pro scouting, more amateur scouting, more analytics, and all of that stuff that will help succeed going forward. But I think we've seen enough from DJ to say, oh, so this is what he can do with good players. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's time to move on. And not maybe, it is time to move on. Go get a guy who, I think there's some great options out there. It'd be awesome if Pittsburgh fails in the playoffs and Mike Sullivan becomes available, because then he's an instant front runner. It's too bad they didn't have their opportunity with a guy like Bruce Cassidy. Because that would have, I guarantee you, a new coaching style like that, probably in the playoffs right now. It's a woulda, shoulda, coulda, but that's the scenario. I think the coaching staff is going to be the one to go. And then the GM gets a very, very thin, short leash.
And I just want to chime in and basically say that I think Dorian and Bonus have earned themselves another year. I think we've seen what they can do when their hands are not tied by someone who's kind of dipping into hockey ops when they shouldn't be. All of Dorian's interviews that I can recall this season, he talked about, yeah, this is something we wanted to do. And then we just talked to the board to make sure like the money was cool with them. So it's like he still had to talk to that board of directors to make sure the money in, money out was within what they were approving of. But ultimately, it's not like he had to go to them and be like, hey, so what are your thoughts on a guy like Jacob Chikrin? It wasn't about that. It was like, hey, listen, we moved out Zaitsev's money earlier this season. Do we have money? Can we bring in a guy like Jake Chikrin? And they're like, yeah, go for it. Boom. He's like, okay, we can decide what assets we want to trade and whatever. And I think that's kind of nice. And if that's going to be the theme going forward, then I think absolutely Dorian and Bonus deserve more leeway and more time with the organization. And ultimately, I'm kind of in agreement with you guys. I think more of the weight goes on the coaching staff. If the Penguins miss out on the playoffs because the Panthers make it instead and Mike Sullivan's let go, I personally think, yeah, front runner guy immediately you should go after, try to sign him. He's a guy who it seems like the veteran players and players in general in Pittsburgh like, but he's seems like a hard-nosed guy. He's emotional on the bench. He doesn't hide it, and he'll get you going. He's got cups to prove it, and I'm all for that.
Yep.
But I think we'll wrap it up there because we're getting short on time here, but it's definitely a conversation that I think is worth revisiting in the summer. Maybe when we have a guest join us for the show. So, yeah, I think we'll leave it there. But thanks to everybody who's watched, listened to today's episode. Really appreciate it. Like we mentioned before, please consider giving us a subscribe or whatever on whatever platform you're listening on. It means a lot to us, and we're constantly trying to get better and give you more content. So really appreciate the support, and go Sens go.
Yeah.
Go Sens go.